So we've just had our first taste of the Azure portal by looking into resource organization. Let's learn a bit more. Once you sign in, the first thing you see here is a list of recently used resources. This allows easy access to what you're probably working with. However, personally, I mostly use the search functionality. In fact, what you see on top here are often shortcuts to the built-in search functionality catered to one specific resource type. But let's start with all resources first. So let me click that here. This brings me to a screen that allows me to search through all my resources. I can filter on subscription, on resource group. I can filter on type, on location, and I can add custom filters as well. I can group my resources, for example, by resource group, and I can choose whether I want a list view or a summary view. And of course, I can also input custom filters here. This is a screen you will often use when you're working on the Azure portal, as this is more or less the basic way to look for a specific resource. But as I mentioned, there are shortcuts. If I go back home, you can see there's a Logic Apps button here, a Subscriptions button, a Function App button. So let me click one of those. And what we end up at now is a screen much like the one we previously saw, but this time catered to resources of the function type. Again, I can add filters on subscription, on resource group, and so on. I can do the same for Logic Apps. I don't have any of those yet. I can do the same for subscriptions, and so on and so on. Not all of those are shortcuts to the search functionality, but a lot of them are. So that is another way to search for a specific resource. To have a look at all the services that are on offer, there's the More Services button on the right here. Let me click that. And we end up on a page with all the services that are on offer on Azure by Microsoft. As you can see, Azure has a lot of services on offer. A lot of those services can be created directly from this page by pressing the plus button. Yet historically, this was used as a page to access services you already created before. By the way, when people refer to things on Azure, they will sometimes refer to resources and other times refer to services and sometimes just use them interchangeably. Yet, strictly speaking, however, a resource is an instance of a service. Say you have 3 HTTP API endpoints you want to create with a serverless approach, separately from each other. For that, you could use an Azure function. This means you would end up with 3 separate Azure Function App resources, one for each endpoint, which are all instances of the Function App service. All right, let's go back home. The next thing I want to show you is the Azure Marketplace. You can get there by clicking Create a Resource on the left here. Through this marketplace, external vendors can publish services which you can then buy. A typical one is SendGrid. Let me search for that. SendGrid is an external service to send mails, and it is offered via the marketplace. So you can buy this and use it in your Azure environment. Yet this service is not managed by Microsoft, so it's from a third-party vendor. That being said, you can also find most of Microsoft's Azure services via the marketplace. As I mentioned before, there's many ways to achieve the same thing on Azure. For example, if I look for App Service, which is the thing you would typically use if you want to publish your own web API or web app to Azure, well, if you look for App Service, you can find App Service related services by third-party vendors, but you can also find a bunch of App Service related services by Microsoft. Needless to say, this marketplace is where you will often start from to create something new. We will thus revisit this page quite a few times during the course. Sometimes you want to search for more than just resources. For that, you can use the search box on top here. So let's say I want to search for subscription. Then you can see I end up with a list of related services, but also things I can find on the marketplace, also things that are found in the documentation and even in Microsoft Entra ID. So you can look at this as a more extensive way of searching for things on and or related to Azure. All right, let me open a specific resource, say the app service I specifically created for the demo. So this would be the app service on which the order management application is hosted. For each resource, the first thing you will see is the overview blade. We are looking at that right now. This gives you access to a set of essential information for each resource, like the resource group it belongs to, the location, the subscription, and so on. This overview blade is not the same for each resource, but you will find likewise things for each resource on each resource's overview blade, combined with other things specific to the resource. On the left, in the menu here, you can find all the blades that are related to this specific resource. These also depend on the resource type, but you will also notice that a lot of these blades come back for the different resource types. Most of them will, for example, have an activity log with recent activity related to the resource. Most of them will also have an access control blade, which can be used to manage access to this resource, allow certain users or roles access to the resource, and so on. A tags blade is also available for most resources. We looked into that before. Almost all resources will also have a monitoring section, which contains blades that are related to different ways of monitoring the resource. You can have alerts, metrics, logs, and so on. We will look into this extensively during this course. Almost all will also have a settings section. This is an app service, so the things you can find here are blades to, for example, manage application settings. So the typical things you would put in an app settings file if you're building your own custom API. But things related to authentication and the identity of the resource can also be found here. That being said, it's not all the same. Let's open another resource, say the function app I created for the demo. Again, you can see this overview blade, an activity log, an access control blade, and so on. But there's also things related to the function itself, like app keys and app files. What I simply want you to remember about this is that even though each resource has its own specific pages on which resource-specific things can be configured, most resources also have a set of likewise pages. So if you know how to navigate through one resource, you will also already have a good idea of how to navigate and configure another resource. So if you learn how to navigate to the different blades and configure one specific resource type, you will very likely feel at home when you need to manage and configure other resource types. So there we go. With that, you should already have a good idea of how to use the Azure portal. Don't worry if this feels like a bit too much at once. There was a lot of information in these clips. There's no need to remember all of that. Throughout the course, we will use the portal, navigate through it, create resources, manage them, configure them, and so on, so many times you will feel right at home on this portal after having finished the course. We started this section with learning about cloud computing basics. Cloud computing offers on-demand access to computing resources over the internet, such as storage, virtual machines, and AI services. That allows companies to scale resources quickly and pay only for what they use, often leading to lower costs compared to traditional data centers. Different cloud models exist. Public cloud services are available to the general public over the internet. Private cloud services are dedicated to a single organization, offering more control but higher costs. The hybrid cloud combines public and private clouds, providing flexibility and versatility. The leading cloud providers today are AWS, Microsoft Azure, and the Google Cloud Platform. Companies often use services from multiple vendors, which is known as the multi-cloud model. Then we learn about a few important key features of cloud platforms. Scalability is one. Availability is another one. Cloud platforms can quickly scale resources and typically guarantee high uptime. Security is another one. Extensive security features, including data encryption, firewalls, and identity management, are offered by cloud vendors. And reliability is yet another one. Resources can be deployed across multiple regions to ensure availability even if one region fails. After that general overview, we learned more about Microsoft Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud platform. It offers over 200 services including virtual machines, AI services and data analytics. It supports 3 primary service models: IaaS, so Infrastructure as a Service, Platform as a Service or PaaS, and Software as a Service or SaaS. Then we talked about Azure's core services. These include compute, networking, storage, and database services. To work with Azure, you need an Azure account. You can get that through a company license, a Visual Studio subscription, or a free Azure account. To set up your development environment, install the ASP.NET Core and Azure workloads in Visual Studio and install the Azure CLI used for managing resources. Then we learned about organizing resources. Resources in Azure are organized into resource groups, which can be grouped by functionality, security boundaries, region, lifecycle, or whichever approach fits your use case. Whichever approach you choose, consistent naming conventions and the use of tags help manage and organize your resources effectively. Lastly, we took a lap around the Azure portal. It provides access to all resources and services, with features like search functionality, resource grouping, and monitoring tools. And that's it for this section. On to the next.